And there are things that I've seen or done that I wish I could remember. And there are things that I've seen or done I wish I could forget. And it's always the things that you've seen or done that you wish you could forget that you remember the most.
We're honored to have Larry with us today, a 25-year veteran here to share his story before, during, and after his military service.
My name's Larry. I was in the Army. I was actually in the Virginia State National Guard for 4 years and then went active duty and spent 25 years on active duty.
Phenomenal. Well, thank you for serving, Larry, and thank you for being here today. What inspired or influenced your decision to join the military?
It was something that I think, always supposed to do ever since I was a little boy. I'm a child of the 70s and 80s, so I grew up on the commercials, Be All That You Can Be. And I always wanted to be one of those guys that was repelling out of the helicopters that you would see on those commercials. But I think the thing that probably inspired me most was the flag. I've always, I don't know how to explain it, but watching the flag fly in the breeze in the wind has always been kind of a driving point for me to serve my country. So I think that's what probably, I think our flag, the way it's designed, the way it was put together, is the perfect symbol of a free republic across the world. And the representation of the flag, the colors, the stripes, the stars, what it all means, when you put all that together, it's not something you can put into words. I think that it's important that people understand it. If you go and ask the civilian out on the street today, even military members, they can't tell you what the colors represent and why they pick those specific colors, what the stars represent, what the background that they're on represents. I think if people could actually understand that, there'd be a lot more, I guess, patriotism for the country, because the flag is, in my opinion, our country.
Absolutely. There's a lot of symbolism built into that flag. Let's talk a little bit about life before service, Larry. Where did you grow up, and what was your life like before you enlisted?
I grew up in Elkton, Virginia, in the Shenandoah Valley, across the mountain from Charlottesville, and pretty much a quiet town. My dad had a small farm, so I grew up taking care of cows, chickens, for a while, hogs. We grew up our own garden. We were a self-sustaining family. So in the summertime, I was baling hay. In the wintertime, I was gathering wood for the fireplace. Like everybody else, it was hard work, but I didn't know it at the time. But growing up like that is what I think helped establish my drive and determination in completing the job and getting the mission done. After I graduated high school, I kind of went stupid for about 3 years. But I was in the National Guard at the time, and my plan was to go active duty before that 5-year time limit was up. Once you go to basic training for the National Guard, or the reserves, you have 5 years to go active duty. Otherwise, you have to repeat basic training again. Now, I don't know if that's changed, but in 1985, that's the way it was. So I finally went active duty after 3 years of stupidiness. And I realized one day that if I didn't do something to change the trajectory, I would lose my opportunity not only to go into the Army and serve my country, but I would probably wind up in jail. So I woke up one morning, made the decision. I walked into the recruiter's office and I said, I want to go active duty. I had found myself in a situation. I was working, but the people that I was hanging around with were just kind of pulling me in a bad direction. And for a while, I just went along with it because it was fun. But then I still had this dream in the back of my head of being a soldier. I still wanted to be a soldier. And I knew that if I didn't change what I was doing, it would never happen. So I was living on my own at the time. And I talked to my parents. I moved back home with them. And after 2 weeks of living there, that's when I finally decided, okay, this is what I need to do. So that's when I went to the recruiter and I said, just get me in as quick as you can and get me out of here. And it didn't take 3 weeks before I was at my first duty station at Fort Lewis, Washington. Wow. Nobody knew what I was doing. Nobody knew where I was going. I just left. I was gone for a week to the MEP station in Richmond, came back home, told them what I was doing, and 2 weeks later I was gone. And I was just, I guess, a year before Desert Storm, Desert Shield. I was at Fort Lewis when all that kicked off. But yeah, it's just one of those pivotal points in a young person's life where they have to make that decision. It's unfortunately some of them completely ignore it. I had the choice to either stay and continue to do what I was doing and find myself in a worse position than I was currently in, or I could go ahead and stand to and do what I felt I needed to do, something that I always wanted to do, and that was be a soldier. But I knew if I kept heading the direction I was going, it would never happen. I had talked to my dad. He's a Korean War vet about it, but Dad never talked about his service. In fact, that you would never have known my dad had been in the service during the Korean War at all, unless you specifically asked. He never referenced it. He never talked about it. And I didn't know at the time. When I enlisted into the National Guard, I wanted to be infantry. But the armory closest to our house was full. They didn't have any available slots. So my recruiter put me into the Signal Corps. That would ultimately prove to be the right choice for me. There was an armory there in Harrisonburg, about not 20 miles from the house, but because they were full, the recruiter put me into an armory in Stanton, Virginia. So yeah, he put me into the Signal Corps. But what I didn't know, and I wouldn't find out until later on, my dad was a signal guy. And so when I found, so that's when he's probably told me more about his service than anybody else. And it kind of helped bridge some gaps between us as I was growing up. And I had a different respect for him at that point in time. Of course, what he did in the Army as a signal guy, completely different from what I did, but I don't know how to explain it. I guess just the mere fact that it seemed like I was following in my father's footsteps, and I didn't even know it. I didn't have a clue.
When was the first time you ever really talked to your father about serving? Or when your father shared some of his experiences with you?
Well, I had made mention of it as I was a teenager about joining the Army. And Dad always told me that it was a good option for some people. For some others, it wasn't. But for me, that was probably the best choice that I could make, if that's what I decided. He never pushed anything on me or my brothers or sisters. He let us make our own path. But for me, he told me that would probably be the best thing that I could do if that's what I wanted. So the night that I got back from the MEP station and I walked in and seen my parents, my aunt and uncle sitting at the table. When I told them where I was and what I had done, my mom got up and gave me a hug, and my dad shook my hand and he said, "That's the best decision you could have ever made." But I still didn't know at the time that he was a signal soldier. I wouldn't find this out until after I had gone active duty. Because again, he never talked about anything. But it wasn't until years later, after my uh, first deployment to Iraq in 06, or I'm sorry, I guess it was my second deployment to Iraq. My dad had come down to visit, and that's when he kind of opened up about some of the things that he experienced. Now, he was stationed in Juneau, Alaska, about as far north as you can get. And his unit there were the ones monitoring Russian communications during the Korean War. So he wasn't deployed to Korea. He didn't see any combat time. But what they did there was just as vital to the war effort as the guys actually in Korea. And I can still remember when I took my dad for the first time to the Signal Museum here at Fort Gordon, well, Fort Eisenhower now. Walking through the museum, he stopped, and I walked back to see what he was looking at, and then he just pointed, and they had a mock setup of an old teletype communication systems, and which is what he used during the Korean War. And he just looked at me and he shook his head. He said, "I never thought I'd ever see one of these again." It's hard to explain because my dad was a very quiet man. He didn't talk. He never referenced his service at all. But when we did talk about it, when he would tell me some of the things that he went through, um, I could relate. And I could talk and tell him about some of the things that I had been through, and he could relate. And it just seemed to bridge a gap that had been there for years when I was growing up because I was adopted. It's just hard to explain. That's just something that seemed to bring us closer together. And I marvel at the systems that are used today, and can only imagine how he felt taking him through the museum and seeing something that he operated on that was brand new in his time. And 50, 60 years later, he sees it in a museum. The whole experience, me being in the Army, being a signal soldier, just kind of seemed to bridge that gap that had been there for years as a kid. And then our shared experiences within the military. I mean, Dad understood what it meant to deploy. He understood the hardships that deployed soldiers went through, things of this nature. It seemed to the Army was the catalyst that actually I don't know, just for lack of a better word, just bridged that gap in our relationship. I don't know how else to explain it.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. So, as a signal soldier, can you describe that role and what your responsibilities were?
So my particular role in the Army, or my particular MOS in the Army, morphed over time. When I originally enlisted in the National Guard, I was 31 kilo, which is a combat signaler. And if you've seen any of those old war movies with the guy carrying the radio on his back or carrying a reel of wire through the woods or whatever, that was my job. So I came up in primarily combat arms. Most of my career was all but about 8 to 10 years was spent in combat arms, mostly at Fort Campbell. In the early '90s, the uh, Army started revamping the MOSs, and My MOS was combined with the 31 Victors, which was the radio side of the house, and we became 31 uniforms. Then in the early 2000s, they started realigning the signal or the enlisted MOSs with the officer corps. So my office, the signal officers were 25 series. So we became 25 uniforms. The job kind of morphed as it went along. We were the ones responsible at the battalion level for bringing in the computers when they started coming online in the Army. And we were also responsible for learning how to design, build battalion level networks, tear them down, move them, set them up again, all of that. So I had an extensive background in computers to some degree, networking and all of that that goes along with it coming up. And then, of course, as I got older, higher up in rank, and I'm training the soldiers and I'm doing all of this and, you know, passing that information and that knowledge down to the next generation, more or less.
What was training like when you first enlisted? Did it meet your expectations, or what were your initial thoughts when you took that leap into
This
service?
sucks. Oh my God. I went to basic training at Fort Sill, Oklahoma in the summer of '85. It was hot. It was hard. A lot of hurry up and stand in line at parade rest forever. Uh, Bivouacs out the ass, classes out the ass. The physical aspect of it was tough. It was very demanding. 17 years old when I went to basic. The one thing that I hated the most was running. I still hate it today. It's always been my Achilles heel. But at the same time, looking back on it, it was also kind of enjoyable because it's these moments when you're building that camaraderie with people, when you're building those teams and those friendships of one thing or another. AIT at Fort Gordon, just as physically demanding. Uh, you learn a lot of information in a very short time. But the way the training was structured, it was actually pretty easy to grasp. It was actually pretty easy to pick up and move from point A to point B to point C without even realizing what you're doing. I wouldn't want to have to go back through it again if you ask me. But it was demanding. It was grueling. But also at the end of the day, when you were done and you got to sit down and finally relax, uh, it was worth it.
What was a typical day like in training?
Up very early in the morning, through your PT, and then a lot of classroom instruction. Even when you went out on bivouac, uh, you might have to pick up and walk a few clicks, but there was always instruction going on. The drill sergeants were always pushing you to do this, pushing you to do that. They were always pointing things out. They were always explaining things as you went along. So, they never would throw you into a situation that, one, you couldn't handle, and two, they weren't there to explain why you were there or what you were doing or how you had to do it. You might have to repeat it several hundred times, but that was so that it would get ingrained, because the whole idea is you need to be able to do your job regardless of what it is without thinking about it. It needs to become more muscle memory than muscle reflex. I don't know. It's hard to explain when you're talking something that happened 40 years ago now at this point. That trying to
I totally
trying to
understand.
remember some of that stuff. You have flashes of the memories of some of the things you went through, like your road marches, uh, and you always carried more weight in your road marches than you actually needed to. But it wasn't to overburden you. It was all everything was always designed to make you more mentally and more physically tougher. But the more mentally tougher that you were, the physical aspects of it sometimes did not apply. You did it without even realizing you were doing it. So if you could cope with the mental aspects of it, basic training and AIT both were more a breeze than anything else.
Oh, wow. You said that your Achilles heel was the running aspect of training. Can you recall the most running you've had to endure in a single day?
When I was at Fort Lewis, my first duty station, our platoon sergeant was a runner, and he loved to go on long runs. And every other Friday was either an 8 to 12 mile run, or it was an 8 to 12 mile ruck march. Probably 8 to 12 miles, just depending on what the Friday was and what kind of mood he was in. We would go out and spend an hour and a half running.
That's quite a day of running.
Well, especially when you come in from the National Guard and you don't have that physical fitness aspect about it. So it took probably about 6 months for me to get caught up to where the rest of the guys were. But yeah, he loved to run us out through the back 40, through all the different uh, little roads and deer trails or whatever the case may be. And then when we came back, if he had that wild hair up his ass, and we'd run around Garrison a little bit, add a little bit extra to it on the hardball, get off the dirt roads. I will say that having done that, that actually made me a better short distance runner, because you don't realize when you're running 7.5 minutes, maybe 8 minute miles for 8 miles, when you're getting ready to run a 2 mile PT test, you're running 6.5, 7 minute miles with no problem. And that's how he trained us. That's how he did it with us. And it never dawned on me until I was physically able to keep up with these runs. And then the first time that I actually took a PT test and I ran it in just under 13 minutes, it dawned on me that regardless of what you think, when you're doing physical fitness, the outcome is always proven by what they try to by what they try to do or what they try to teach you. And so there was just a lot of things that I learned my platoon sergeant in that respect that I tried to carry forward. It's the end result that you don't expect when you're being physically challenged in that way.
Yeah, that's interesting how those things come to light kind of after the fact that you don't necessarily anticipate in the moment.
So I never joined the Army for the medals or the awards. So I never really had any expectations or anything of that nature for myself. I would have to say some of the most rewarding things that I can think of would be seeing my soldiers being promoted or my soldiers reaching the NCO rank and moving forward on their own. I always had the frame of mind that it didn't matter what happened to me as long as I could take care of them and help them advance. And I had a soldier one time tell me, "I want to emulate you." And it pissed me off because I don't want you to emulate me. I want you to take what I teach you and make it your own. Pick and choose what I do or what I don't do. Pick and choose what I say or I don't say, and mold that into yourself. Because the Army doesn't want an emulation. They want soldiers that can think on their own. And the only way you're going to do that is take the good and bad and use it to improve yourself. So the most rewarding thing for me were seeing soldiers that I have trained advance in their own right to become NCOs, and in some cases, even jump over through OCS and become officers or warrant officers. So I can't pinpoint any one particular thing that was rewarding to me, other than seeing my boys move forward on their own. if that makes any sense.
It does.
I'm not one of those guys that wears the jackets with the pins and the patches and everything all over it. You would never know I was in unless you see me with some type of military cap on, veterans cap or something, or if you're behind me in traffic and you see my retired tag on my truck. I appreciate the fact that people want to come up and say thank you for your service. I don't know. It's just it's hard to it's not one of those things that you can just put words on. I seen a meme that said if you want to thank a veteran, support them, and I think that's the best way that you can do that. I didn't do what I did so that people could walk up and say thank you. I appreciate when they do. But every time there's a veteran that comes up and says that to me, especially an older veteran, I stop and say, no, thank you. Because what you did is lay the groundwork for soldiers like me. And hopefully, I laid the groundwork for the next generation of soldiers. And I think that's how you reciprocate one's service. It's not about what I did in terms of serving my country. Did I lay the groundwork for the next generation to be able to do the same thing? And will they be able to lay the groundwork for the next generation? And so on and so on. So I understand the sentiment, but it's just one of those things you can't put words on. You can't explain it. You can't describe it.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that.
When you're deploying, especially if you're one of the first to deploy, and I don't care if you're going on an active mission or if it's a training mission or whatever the case may be, you're always kind of starting up from a blackout mode. Never, there's never anything already. You can't just go and plug a radio system into a tree. So you're always kind of starting up from a blackout mode. But I will say this: a lot of the equipment in the Army, especially signal equipment, is hardened. In other words, it's designed to resist an EMP or some type of a radiation or nuclear warfare in that respect, depending on where you are. But it's designed more to resist an EMP, the electromagnetic pulse. And if you have one of those, of course, that just knocks everything out. So you have to be able to bring your systems back up in that respect. And in today's world, with the digital technology that we have, it's very easy to knock that stuff out in a heartbeat. But again, the systems that we have, they're hardened and they're designed to resist, to be able to resist that. The Army, the military is always 2 or 3 steps ahead of where the civilians are in that respect. So yeah, they're training for something that might not take place for another 50 years. But when that 50-year event happens, they're better prepared to handle it.
What kind of bonds did you form with others in your unit, and do you still keep in touch with anybody?
I don't. Some of that is my failing, but ever since I was little, uh, I've always been kind of a, I guess, loner in that. You could say I was always the kid in the back that uh, you forget I'm there. Some of the bonds that I made, some of the friends that I've made, I'll be honest with you, I can't even remember names, and I don't know if that's just because I mean, I can remember faces, but I can't remember names. I had some good friendships, and but for me, I found it difficult to stay in touch with people as we went from one place to another and we got split up. And since I've gotten out of the Army, again, I've been kind of in my own bubble here for a while. Even with the soldiers that I had at Fort Campbell, I had an outstanding section the last couple of years there. I was there and deployed to Afghanistan with them. I wish I could have stayed in touch with some of these guys, but some situations you find yourself in, especially when you get out, um, overshadows everything else. Unfortunately, I don't. That's all I can say.
I think that's common too, that even with friendships for a civilian like me, you see over time things evolve and change, and it's hard to keep in touch. But once in a while, there is a long lasting bond. So I always like to ask that. Did you have any mentor or colleague in particular that you can recall or remember, or somebody that you looked up to during your service?
Maybe a couple. I mean, my first platoon sergeant or my first section sergeant when I was in the Army, Sergeant First Class Bronson. I don't know what it was that he saw in me, but he saw something that I didn't. And it took a couple of uh, alcohol incidences on my part because I was young, dumb, and uh, you know, you know how that goes. Um, but I got because of my alcoholism, I got into trouble that uh, gave me put me into an Article 15 with the 14 days restriction and spent 14 days extra duty, 14 days restriction, and then 6 months of suspension. And he pulled me off to the side and he told me I remember after walking out of my commander's office, he pulled me off to the side and he said, "Look," he said, "you have a choice." He said, "You can screw this up right now and get it over with, or you can pull your head out of your ass and realize you have an opportunity to take things to the next level right now." And paraphrasing, obviously, but that's basically what he meant. So for the next 6 months, I kept my nose clean. I didn't miss a single formation. I didn't do anything that would give me one infraction and the reason the commander needed to bust me and take my pay. And after that 6 months was over, I finally got promoted to specialist. And my platoon sergeant came over to me at that point. He said, "Now is the time where you take that next step. And what's it going to be?" That was the first time I really understood what it meant, I think, to be a soldier for me. He could have recommended that I get chaptered out at that point. I was at that point where, and this was just 6 months in. Well, actually, it's about a year in, I guess, a couple of years in. I don't remember, about a year in. From that point forward, I didn't look back. I had to go through the DAPSI program. I successfully completed that. I took that, I took what happened to me, what I did, and I used it as a learning tool for myself. And because of what he did by giving me the opportunity to correct myself and with the proper guidance that he provided, I was able in the future to take that event and use it as a teaching tool for my soldiers in the future. So I credit a lot of my success in the Army for what my section sergeant did then. Because he had the choice. He had every right to recommend to the commander to chapter me out. I was on that verge. But instead, he pulled back, gave me the opportunity to self-correct, and then guided me to make sure that I stayed on that path until I knew where I was actually stepping. So I give a lot of credit to him. And then I guess moving forward, I would have to say the only other person that I can physically remember would be an individual, another NCO by the name of Doug Elkins. He and I served together at Fort Campbell well, pretty much the whole 5-year time frame I was in that unit. But he had been a Special Forces NCO and had been medically retired at one point, but had been recalled back in. And he was assigned as our S2. And he would offer me advice from time to time. And we became close friends there for a while we were there together. But he would offer advice from time to time from his experiences and how he dealt with people, which kind of helped me in some certain circumstances or situations, and in some of the things that I had to do, or some of the things that I had to deal with. So I would have to say those are probably the first two that come to mind, as far as mentors are concerned. I had some good officers along the way, but to be honest, it was in the NCO Corps for me where I found the mentors, because those are the guys that are down there with you. Those are the guys that are, where the metal meets the grind, and so to speak. And so I'd have to say that those are probably the only two that I could think of that would come to mind that gave me the opportunities, or gave me the advice that I needed at particular points in time, that helped me further my own ability to do not only my job, but to mentor my soldiers as well.
In mentoring your soldiers, did you ever have a moment where maybe you had somebody that was similar to you, where they may have been on a path of possibly being chaptered out, but you straightened them out? Did that ever occur?
Oh, there was a number of soldiers like that. I always referred back to incidences that happened to me. I never hid the moments where I got in trouble, or where I did something stupid that got me in front of the commander. Like my Article 15, I had two Article 15s in my career. One was for alcohol related incidents, and one was for being late. And I never shied away from them. I wasn't embarrassed about them. These are things that happened that I screwed up on. And what I want you to do is understand what I did, so that you don't make these same mistakes. Now, I had a number of soldiers that would do stupid stuff, and sometimes you have no choice. You have to bring the hammer down on them. But at the same time, uh, some people get stuck in their ways, especially the junior NCOs, where they think something should be done a certain way. And it doesn't matter how much you try to explain why you don't do it this way. Now, as a senior NCO, it is not my obligation, or as of somebody in charge or somebody in command, we're not obligated to tell you every little reason. Sometimes it doesn't matter what I tell you to go do. What matters is, one, that you do it, and the end result is what everyone is looking for. And I used to tell my soldiers, you don't have to understand why I'm telling you to do what you do. But as you go along performing the task to complete that assigned mission or that assigned task, it will come to light, especially at the end of it. Then you will understand what I've been trying to tell you. Some people grasp that, some don't. Some just want to fight you every step of the way, and then be pissed off about it. I would have to say that last section, the last group of soldiers that I had that I deployed to Afghanistan with, probably took the lessons that I tried to teach them more to heart than anybody else that I had under my charge in the past. And I remember when I came back from the National Guard. I mean, not from the National Guard. When we came back from Iraq after our second deployment, we had a new NCO, a new sergeant, and a couple of new soldiers right out of AIT. My sergeant was fresh out of the National Guard, but he was an MP. So when he went active duty, they changed his MOS and he became a signal soldier. Now, when you come back from deployment, you're rushing. You got your 7-day reintegration plan, and then you're looking at getting ready to go on 30 days leave, but you've got all this other stuff to do beforehand. And then as soon as you come back off leave, you got to start prepping, turning equipment in, getting it checked out, and all this other stuff. So we're in the process. When we came back off our leave, in January of 2009, or at the beginning of it, right after Christmas, I pulled him off to the side and I said, look, I owe you a 30-day counseling. I'm just not going to give it the written one to you right now. I'm going to give you a verbal counseling. And I want you to listen to me carefully. I said, right now, you are a striper. You are a sergeant. I don't need a sergeant. I need an NCO because there is a difference. I said, one of two things is going to happen. I'm either going to make you or I'm going to break you. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. There is too much flying around. I don't have time to coddle you. You are already wearing stripes. I expect you to conduct yourself accordingly. I said, don't worry about the signal stuff. That's going to come to you as you watch what I'm doing. I said, but I need you to be an NCO. And I left it at that. I didn't have to go back and repeat myself again to this kid. He stood up. Not only did he grasp what I was talking about for NCO, but when it came time to making decisions, when it came time to having to make command decisions in that respect, I pulled him off to the side and said, look, this is what needs to happen. What is your recommendation? And I would listen to him why he tried to tell me what he thought should happen. And then I would correct him when he was finished. I said, no, you have to look at things from this perspective, or you have to do things in this way to meet this goal. You have to start looking at soldiers. If I'm in that position of that soldier, what is he thinking? What can you do to help him? Or what needs to be done to complete this task, or to the steps needed to take to complete this mission? And that's how I tried to teach the NCOs as well as the soldiers as they were coming up, preparing to move into the NCO roles or into the ranks of the NCO. I was never one of those guys, do as I say, don't, or do as I say, not as I do. I tried to lead by example as far as this is how it needs to be done. This is what I'm going to do. And this is what you guys will do as well. If I tell you to do it, you can damn well best believe that I'm doing it on the backside. So I tried to mentor my soldiers, especially the NCOs. One, there are times where you have to bring the hammer down, but sometimes when you bring that hammer down, you don't always have to bring it down with force. Sometimes you can just lay that hammer down on the desk and say, now look, you've got this choice. And again, I refer back to my platoon sergeant from when I was a young, dumb private, and the opportunities that he provided by not chaptering me out. Sometimes you don't have a choice. Sometimes you have to bust somebody. And I've been in that boat a couple of different times. But I always, especially with my NCO in the last round, he caught on quick. And he understood that when I came in and I started looking at that checkbox at the blackboard that I had, checking off the things that needed to get done for the day, or writing up new tasks, writing up new missions, I would use different colors to indicate the priority. And I put a lot of faith and trust in him to be able to accomplish that, because at the same time, I was working a dual role. I was the NCOIC, but I had no signal officer. So I was also performing signal officer tasks. But he picked up the concept of being an NCO and being able to step into that role. And the signal stuff came to him as he went along. I don't know how to explain it other than to say I provided the opportunity. I gave them a left and a right limit. And all I did was make sure they stayed in the road. I didn't care how far right they went. I didn't care how far left they went. As long as they didn't cross that limit, they were okay. And that's what I tried to That was the main thing, I guess, that I tried to explain to my NCOs and then push that down to the soldiers. As long as you stay on this path, you will get it. You will understand. You will learn. And then you pass this knowledge down to the next individual so that it keeps moving. And that way, everybody can stay within that limit to the left and to the right and be more centered. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Given what you've learned with your experience with developing yourself and helping develop others, do you have any advice for younger individuals who are looking to serve or those who are maybe beginning to serve today?
Throw out your expectations. Everybody comes in with a certain degree of expectations of what they think it's going to be like, and then they find out that it's not. And some people can't handle that. You can't join the military expecting to do this or expecting to do that. Sometimes, even in the military, life throws curveballs at you. You have to know how to react to those curveballs. Sometimes those things change your plans, what you wanted to do. Sometimes those things change uh, and gives you opportunities you never expected or never thought that you'd have. So you have to throw out your expectations. But I guess the most important thing is have a good, positive mental aspect about it, because 90% of that crap is mental. It's, and I'm sure you probably heard this from a lot of other people because it's a fact. If you can mentally overcome it, the physical aspect will come to it. But it's all in your head. You get rid of your expectations and go with the flow and be mentally prepared for what comes to you. And if you can get rid of the expectations, you will be mentally prepared because nothing's going to surprise you. It's going to suck. It's there's no doubt about that. It's always going to suck. But if you just throw out your expectations and let yourself be uh, mentally prepared for what they throw at you, you will be able to succeed. And not only that, but you'll be able to go further than what you expected from yourself.
Great advice. Can you recall any unusual traditions or superstitions while serving? Was there any traditions that you carried out during your service?
Well, they don't do it anymore, but back in the day when a soldier got promoted, uh, there was the tradition where they would, now it's Velcro. Back then it was the pin on rank, and everybody would get in line and slam their fist down on your rank. And in some cases, it would it would knock those pins into your collarbone, or it would pierce. I mean, generally, it would end up piercing your skin. Um, but that was something they knocked out years ago because people could actually get their collarbone broke. Because some guys would just come up and it's just as hard as they could wail down on that rank, and it would actually break your collarbone. So that was something they got rid of. Um, but I mean, outside the normal Army traditions, the balls and stuff like that, I can't really say that I recall anything of that nature or anything that I took part of in that respect.
What's your outlook for the future of military in the U.S.?
If it stays the way it stays right now, uh, I think you're going to see the military severely degraded the way it is right now. The military is an organization that society needs to keep its hands off. It just needs to be hands off. The only civilian the military needs to follow is the commander in chief, the president of the United States. And with all the social experimentation that's been going on over the last few years, you've just watched the Army, the military in general, just degrade itself. We're not your atypical organization. Our whole purpose is designed to, the whole purpose of the United States military, any military in general, but specifically the United States military, is to meet, defeat, and destroy the enemies on the battlefield. And you can't do that when you are worrying about social experiments. I understand the civilian, the social aspect of it, and they have, the civilians are always going to change. Every 10 to 15 years, we see a new cycle come on. But that type of crap needs to stay out of the military, period. With Donald Trump coming back in as president, I hope that it gets improved. But if it stays where it's at right now and continues to go on the path that it's on right now, I don't have a good feeling for the future of it.
I would agree with that sentiment. Did you ever read the soldier mail from students or receive any memorable care packages or anything?
When in 2003, or excuse me, 2002, I was assigned to Fort Gordon at the NCO Academy as a small group leader, an SGL. And one of my classes, at the end of the class, presented me a T-shirt. Now, every class had to make up a T-shirt, and we always let them design whatever it was that they wanted to do. They would come up with the design and then order the T-shirt. They actually made one for me, which I still have. I've never worn it, except for at that particular time we would wear it at PT. But it was a T-shirt with a representation of an individual sitting in jail with a stone and chain tied to their foot, and listed everybody's name as the inmate and then me as the warden. So I would have to say that was probably, it's the only time I actually received something in that respect.
I've heard some veterans tell me they would get creative with their MREs. Have you ever gotten creative with your MREs? One person told me they made a wafer out of creamer. Have you heard of this kind of thing? Did you have a favorite meal or?
Well, the creamer thing was always there. Yeah. We used to do that all the time. One of the things that I liked, back in the old days, I was in the military off the original MREs when they came in the dark brown packaging. And they had this one MRE that was nothing but basically spaghetti sauce, more or less. But there was nothing else with it. So I used to take ramen to the field with me to make spaghetti. Other times, I never got into the whole batch of. I've seen guys do it, but I never got into the whole thing of, dumping the MREs, all the MRE stuff into one pot and mixing it up that way. I never got into any of that. But I would save some of the stuff to, uh, like the granola bars or the cocoa powder. Sometimes when you're out rucking through the woods at 2 or 3 in the morning, that's a good way to eat a snack. And the granola bars are harder than a brick, so you can just chew on them for a while. The cocoa powder would give you extra boost of energy. But I can't say I ever really got creative with some of the stuff, but um, you come up you come up with some things to do with the MREs. You would be surprised with some of the MREs suck, but you would be surprised what you could do with them. I guess it just depends on where you are and the situation you're in and how hungry you are.
What was the transition like from military life back to civilian life for you?
One thing I found out was that unless you were an officer, they didn't want to talk to you. Even with the experience that I had as a signal guy, I remember applying for all these different jobs, and everybody wants you to be one of those operators for some company or whatever. When you're calling for help or somebody, they want you to be one of those guys, and that's not something that I could do. I tried it. It's just not. It didn't fit me. But the one thing that has always stuck out to me, I applied for a job with AT&T. I figured that I would, with my experience and just coming out of the military, I didn't expect any issues. I had AT&T tell me I didn't meet the requirements. Well, what kind of requirements are you looking for? But I came to understand that because I wasn't an officer, they didn't care what I did. They didn't care that the experiences that I had, the capabilities that I could bring, or whatever the case may be. I ended up getting a job contracting, working in cable hubs, rewiring cable hubs, building data centers, things of that nature. And honestly, I kind of fell into that line of work and found it rewarding because there's only two things that I have found that I've been able to do to help me in the mental aspect, to help calm my mind, to help take my mind away from things. And that was fishing or laying cable, making cable. You find something where um, you can your mind can relax and you can focus in. It helped me focus. That's probably the one thing that helped me in my transition. I mean, when I retired, I was done. I was just mentally and physically, I was done. I knew my career was over, and I was happy it was over. There's some things that I miss about it, and there are some things I wish I could go back to again. But I retired just a couple of months shy of 30 years of military service between my guard and active time. So when I got out, I was finished. All I wanted was something that could help focus and help calm my mind. And I found that in being able to either go fishing or uh, working in a cable hub. Because when you're doing things of that nature, if you're sitting out on a pond somewhere fishing or a lake or river, whatever the case may be, uh, I didn't care if I caught anything. I'd sit there for 12 hours straight with the line in the water and just sit. But it was relaxing. When I was working in a cable hub or I was working in a data center, I could throw my earphones on and just concentrate on what I was doing and forget everything else. And that's all I wanted with the transition. I wasn't one of those guys that went to all these different little meetings and hung out here and did this and did that, trying to move forward and blah, 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 blah. I just wanted something that could help focus my mind. And that's how I found it.
What kind of fishing do you like doing?
I love bass fishing. I wish I could. I wish I could get out on the boat like some of these guys do in the fishing tournaments and things of that nature. But I've done a little bit of trout fishing in the past, but most of that was just off straight line, not the fly fishing type that most guys do for trout. But most of the time, most of my fishing is usually either off of a river, doing some catfishing or something like that, or just some pond fishing. I mean, honestly, it doesn't. While I enjoy catching a bass, and I love the fight, but for me, it wasn't necessarily about what kind of fish I caught versus just the act of fishing itself. If I had to make a bucket list, that would be the only thing on it is ocean fishing. I've never been out on the ocean to go fishing, and that is the one thing that I want to do. I want to catch tuna, or I want to catch one of these. I don't give a shit what it is. I just want to get out on a boat a couple of miles offshore and go fishing. That is the one thing I want to do before I leave this planet.
You're making me want to go fishing right now. Anyway, how do you feel your service shaped who you are today?
I'm proud of what I did personally. And I never asked anybody I never demanded anybody to thank me or, you know, give me the accolades or any of that crap. I don't care about any of that.
Are there any other memories or stories from your service that you'd like to share?
Probably one of the most memorable things that I was involved in was being able to re-enlist on the USS Missouri. When I was in Hawaii, I spent 4 years in Hawaii from 98 to 02. And they had a program going on when you re-enlisted. You were able to go and actually re-enlist on the ship. They let you raise a flag up on the yard arm there and bring it back down, and then they would fold it up and present it to you. And I thought that, and then of course you got the free tour of the ship. I'll never forget doing that. That's probably one of the highlights of my reenlistments, because most of them were just sign this piece of paper and you're stuck for another 4 years. Be honest, I'll tell you the same thing that I said when I retired. Um, when I got my last award, my final award for my service, um, they give you the floor to speak for whatever, to say whatever you want. What do you say at the end of a 25 and half year career? And there are things that I've seen or done that I wish I could remember. And there are things that I've seen or done I wish I could forget. And it's always the things that you've seen or done that you wish you could forget that you remember the most. I was in Hawaii when 9/11 happened. I was deployed to Haiti in 95, the Sinai Desert in 97, 2 tours to Iraq, 1 to Afghanistan. All of them were filled with good times. Some of them were filled with bad times. I can't pinpoint any one particular event outside the Missouri that I wish I could remember. I don't know if they still have it now or not. Back then, this was in 2001, I think it was when I did it. But when you re-enlisted, you had the opportunity to actually re-enlist on the USS Missouri. And when you did, you got to raise the flag on the ship at the yard arm, I think they call it. And then it would be lowered. They would fold it up and then present it to you with a plaque, and indicating you re-enlisted at such and such date and time on the USS Missouri. And then you got to go on a free tour of the ship, which to me was one of the highlights for me that I can readily remember, because I've always been fascinated with the history of World War II. But then actually walking on the ship, and of course they got the plaque inlaid in the deck of where the Japanese signed the final surrender. I remember specifically that event because as we're walking through the ship and walking, um, you can actually still see. I mean, some of the battle damage is still there, like when the ship was struck by the kamikazes, and you can actually see where an aircraft actually hit the ship because the metal's still bent. And I, it was one of those cool moments, like, oh my God. I mean, you can actually see this. It's one thing about reading and seeing, reading the stories, seeing the movies, or hearing from veterans, and one thing or another. But when you can actually physically touch something, it brings a whole different perspective into it. And the morning that I reenlisted, I think it wasn't my final time for reenlistment, but it was either before, I think it wasn't the last reenlistment that I would have, but it was the one before it. And so being able to reenlist on the Missouri was, that's something that I will probably never ever forget. But not only that, just seeing the actual battle damage that it incurred 50 years earlier from a kamikaze strike, uh, it put it in a whole different perspective. I mean, I not only am I re-enlisting on the USS Missouri, but I'm re-enlisting on an actual piece of legacy. It was just incredible.
Absolutely, absolutely incredible. What do you miss about military life, and how do you cope or come to terms with that?
Probably the thing that I miss most, to be honest with you, the Army is what gave me my sense of identity. It gave me the purpose that, or a drive that I'd never had before. Because of my background from my childhood, uh, I never knew who I was. I never knew where I came from. Being in the Army was something that I knew I would do from a very early age. So it gave me a sense. It gave me a sense of self identity. I don't know how else to explain it. Now, since I retired, there's been a lot of things that have happened personally that um, have really put me in some bad places. Um, but that is the one thing that has always helped me to focus, even though I'm not in, even though I don't have anything to do with the Army now or the military in general. I don't associate with the VFW. I don't do the veterans programs or any of that stuff. To be honest, it's extremely difficult to do that stuff. It's very difficult for me to be able to connect. It's easy to do this because we're not sitting here face to face and you're on the other side of the country. And if I want to, I can just shut my phone off. So that's the
Right.
one thing that I miss, that I will say I do miss, is the self identity and the purpose that it gave me, and the ability to be able to share that with my soldiers and NCOs.
Thank you for sharing all this stuff. Is there anything else about your service that you want to talk about?
You know, to be honest with you, and you can edit this part out if you want, I don't care.
Mhm.
You are the first person that has ever asked me any of these questions. Not even my own family has ever asked me what I did or what it was like while I was in the Army. So thank you.
Oh, absolutely, my pleasure, Larry. Thank you for sitting down and reaching out and taking the time to have the conversation. It's my pleasure.
You have a good day, sir.
I appreciate your time, Larry. Thank you.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it.
For veterans resources or to share your story, visit vmnews.us.